How are you? Sorry that I came like a minute late. Could you do me a favor and make me a moderator? So how you do that is you click on my profile picture, and on the bottom there should be an option, make moderator. So that way I can share, put the presentation up. And perfect, thank you. How are you today?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. I think I think Mark is having some kind of difficulties log in. We are solving this out. Otherwise, I probably will set up a team meeting so we can use team as a bridge, and his voice can be transferred to this clubhouse somehow. It's yeah, that's a plan. We are waiting. I'm waiting for his reply on the email at the moment. Yeah, you received the PowerPoint, right?
Yes, I did.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, so regular issues are he needs to log in the first time with the phone and not the desktop. That sometimes is an
Yeah,
issue.
I think he is trying to log on through his phone, but
Okay.
his phone number is not recognizable somehow. It is a standard UK number. I'm not sure how.
Not.
Yeah.
That's weird. He didn't get the confirmation message on his phone. Usually you get like a confirmation message.
Probably not yet. I think he's doing something at the moment.
And then what sometimes also is a problem, if you're at a university or so, sometimes the Wi-Fi, the settings block a social media interaction. So using then cellular data instead of the institute Wi-Fi usually also helps.
Ah, I see. I'll let him know this. I think at this point he's at home now. It's 7 o'clock UK time.
Yeah, then it should be fine. What else could the pro? Yeah, it's weird that with the phone number. Usually, I never heard
Yeah,
that.
he said the code. He is trying to connect. The code is 01. Right. He said his phone number is not supported. I'll set up a team meeting on our side so he can talk. This is just yeah. This I'm not sure how it's.
Yeah, I never heard that. That is so weird. Not
Mm,
supported. That is. Did he try to? Does he put 00 in or plus and then the UK?
I think he tried everything. It's
Uh,
cause when you click this, it asks you to choose a country, so it's always plus.
right. Yeah, it's always plus.
Yes.
Huh.
So yeah.
I don't know. Never heard of that problem. We had different problems, but that's the first. It's a
A new problem.
it's a new problem. Well, we still have minutes, and even if we take a
Yeah.
little bit longer to start, it's not an issue. So.
Yes. Anyway, it's Friday, so
Yeah, happy Friday.
yeah.
Hope
So
your
it's
week was good.
yeah, good week. Yes. And uh,
Hi everyone. We will start in a little bit. Our guest, like Ray, is here, but then also Mark wanted to join. To give the talk. He's having issues. I don't know if any one of you had heard of this issue before, that his UK phone number says it's not supported, that phone number. I don't know if anyone in the room experienced that ever before and what the solution is for it. I don't have any, but Ray is setting up a meeting, like Google Meet or so, on his side, so the voice of Mark will be also streamed through Ray's account. So I think that's a solution.
Yes, I'm trying to use. I'll talk to Mark via Teams, and then we can we can pretend he's on the Clubhouse.
Yeah. Thank you for doing that. I'm so glad that
Yeah,
right there.
this technology is just
Yeah, it's kind of good and bad. It's like both. On the one side, if we would traditionally meet, we would never have, get to know so many people, because it would be harder. But then on the other hand, there's still a lot of issues. So yeah.
Seen shouting, "Oi mate, you're only supposed to move diagonally." Justin Welby. Ray, hello.
Hi, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can't get this bloody Clubhouse thing
No.
to accept my phone numbers.
It's sometimes difficult. I got some issues as well, but I think your voice at the moment can be transferred to the Clubhouse app. Katerina, can you hear Mark?
Yes, I can hear. Can Mark? Can you hear me? Maybe I don't know if Mark can hear me, if the streaming works well enough. If not, you have to translate, right?
Something I thought of quickly
Mark,
is
can
that,
you hear
sorry, I just thought maybe try the +44 to put that in before the number, and that might work.
Ray, can you still hear us?
Sorry, I didn't hear the other gentleman's speak.
Oh, yeah. We also discussed that, Kyle, to put the +44 first and then the number. If that would make a difference, but I think Mark tried that, as far as I can.
Right, Mark, did you try? I mean, use not 0044 but +44.
Yeah, I've got in now. It's asking me what 5 topics do I enjoy talking about.
Oh, you are on now. Oh, great.
Just skip that part.
How do I get?
Then you go to her email. You go to the email I send you, and there's a link. Use your phone. And click. Hang on. Yeah, it took me ages to figure this out.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. It's a new technology.
Well, thank you for going through that. We really appreciate it. So, yeah. In the meantime, everyone, thank you for coming. Share the room if you think this is interesting for some people, and we will start soon. Oh, I see Mike. Okay. In the meantime, I have to share.
You click the link. Does it say that? I mean, open in the app, Clubhouse app or something like that?
Yeah. So now the presentation also works. Perfect.
When did you send it to me?
I can send. I can send
the
you.
link to this.
We'll send it again.
Yes, I'll send you again. And
I can also send it. Okay. Okay, I just sent the link again. I don't know if Mark can hear me, but I just sent the link, and in the meantime, let me share with everyone the paper in the chat. There, everyone, and everyone can now check out the presentation that will be
Great,
used,
thanks.
and we will start in a minute. We'll start by introducing our guest speakers. So if you see Mark.
Okay, I've got the link. Let's hang on. It's just
Now you should
Yeah.
be just clicking on the link. It should and then join room in progress. The app should pop up, and then you click on join room in progress. Let me know if that works.
so if I hit happening now, should I get through?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And let me see. I'm checking if you're there. Let me know when you see Ray and myself.
Taking me back to get the app.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. It asks you to get the app, and then you go to Google, and then the Google Play says that you already have the app. You just click open, and then it goes to the app.
Yeah. I couldn't add Mark to the speaker list because he didn't have he wasn't following me, so.
No, it's taking me back to loading the app again.
So are you in the app right now? Let me.
Mark, can you hear her when she speak talking? You can hear. Okay. Okay.
Oh, are you right now in?
I mean, you
No, I can't find you because you're not following me.
No, I'm probably will keep this. I think you can hear Mark, and Mark can hear you as well. So, and then we can start.
Okay.
Already from yeah.
Okay, then let's start, and if it works out in the meantime, that's good. So, welcome everyone to the Science Society, and of course, special welcome to Ray and Mark. And before we start, let me give you a little bit of an introduction, so you get to know the guest speakers a little bit better. So, Ray Liu, he's our early China collection curator at the British Museum, and he is specialized in archaeological science and museum collections, and he's an Oxford alumni. He did he went to School of Archaeology, University of Oxford, and did there his master's degree, and then he did his PhD also at the School of Archaeology, University in Oxford. And his thesis was about studying scientific studies on ancient Chinese bronzes, including technology and the provenance of metal and wider social impact. And then we have Professor Mark Pollard. You will hear his voice being streamed through Ray's account. He's an Edward Hall Professor of Archaeological Science. He and the director of the Research Laboratory for Archaeology and the History of Art. And His research over the past 35 years has encompassed the application of the physical sciences, particularly chemistry, in archaeology, and has included a wide range of topics. His research can be summarized under the main three focus points: the study of archaeological materials, the investigation of biogeochemical processes, and numerical application in archaeology and paleoclimatic reconstruction. And he has been supported by many research grants, and he published a lot of work around that. So welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to come here today. We really appreciate it. And usually before we start, we ask like a couple of interview questions, if that's okay with the both of you. And the question we have for you is, what did you always want to become a researcher and archaeologist? Was that like a childhood dream, or was something that sparked your interest in the field? Maybe a book, or a great teacher, a great class? And if you both would like to answer, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark, do you want to answer this question first? I guess you got a lot to say.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, well, can they hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Mark.
I started out as a theoretical physicist, and sort of came into archaeology as a postgraduate student, and I've been working in it ever since. So the answer is no, I didn't really intend to be an archaeologist. I've just retired as the Professor of Archaeological Science at the University of Oxford. So I've been doing it 45 years. And what got me into it actually was the 1972 exhibition at the British Museum on the finds from Tutankhamun's tomb, which was pretty spectacular.
For me.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
For me, I guess the most important thing is that actually I'm one of Mark's PhD student, and I really appreciate my supervisor's help to put me on this wonderful field. My background was was science, was mainly science, and I was trained as a conservation scientist from Northwest University in China, and then I came to Oxford to and met Mark and other colleagues, and I started archaeological science. And then I found this field is really fascinating, especially the subfield which we often call archaeometallurgy. It's basically to look at the metal and the metallurgical remains in the archaeological field. And I just like spending time with metals, especially bronzes. Now I'm a early China collection curator at British Museum. So we got quite a lot of beautiful Chinese bronzes, and I sometimes can spend it like a whole day just looking at them, the patina, the decoration, and the technology, etc., etc. So it's kind of like really the fascination with bronzes that take me to this field.
Wow, that's both stories are really wonderful and interesting. That Mark switched later on his career, and then Ray, that you basically work in the field that you're really passionate about. And on Mark, on the website, you really look like a real life Indiana Jones. I'm sorry, with the hat, and that's why I thought you always probably wanted to become an archaeologist. So it's so interesting to hear that you later on switched. So that's really interesting. And for this project, is there maybe a background story around this project? Was there maybe a surprising find that kind of triggered you investigate this more, or was it maybe is there like a behind the curtain story about this project? Thank you.
Right. Mark, maybe I answer this first. Sorry? Yeah. Go.
Ray and I have been looking at the chemical composition of Chinese bronzes for 10 years, 12 years, something like that. And it's clear when you look at the literature that there are some problems in the interpretation of the chemistry of bronzes that have been around for a long time. And one of them is a text called the Kaogongji, which I don't know if you've got the PowerPoint, but it's on the first slide of the PowerPoint. And the Kaogongji was written in, well, it was sometime during the Warring States, which is 300-ish BC, something like that. But it's probably an older document. And the literature on the modern literature on Chinese bronzes has been around for 100 years, trying to interpret what the Kaogongji actually says. And so that's a problem Ray and I have thought about off and on for 10 years. And it was actually while we were working on the chemical composition of early Chinese coinage, pre-Qin coinage, so before 221 BC, that I began to notice that there were very strong correlation lines in the chemistry of these coins when you plot the data. And that got me thinking about how the coinage was made, actually how the metal was made as it was being poured into the molds. And that started us thinking again about Kaogongji. So it's something that's been around for a long time, and I think we've got a different answer to the one that the majority of particularly Chinese scholars have come up with. And if we're correct, then it introduces an interesting level of complexity in how we interpret the data from the chemical analysis of Chinese bronzes. Right.
Great. And just to follow on Mark's, actually there are a lot of stories to talk about. I mean, actually the paper Katerina just kindly shared is really led by Mark. It's really his pioneer research that, cause I mean in 2020, I mean the second year of COVID, last year actually, we Mark actually, I mean together, I'm on that paper as well. We published a paper on the Chinese coinage to look at how the relationship, what are the correlations between the three major components in the Chinese bronzes, copper, tin, and lead. And at that time, Mark got this brilliant idea that this pre-alloyed ingots. And then one day he just came to me and said that, well, how about we correlate the pre-alloyed ingots with the with the Jing and Xi? And at that time, I was kind of like, wow, that's a great idea. But I mean, then we try it out. It really took us quite a long time to think that is really a great idea. It's mainly because over the last 10 years or so, I mean, Mark and the other Professor Jessica Rosen from Oxford often took me to China and look at the mining sites, look at the archaeological sites. And one thing out of these trips that is really striking is the massive, the large-scale production of bronzes back to the Bronze Age, Chinese Bronze Age, which is like 3,000 years ago. I mean, in one single tomb, you can sometimes dig out like a ton of metal, and to produce this kind of, I mean, 1 ton of metal requires like 100 tons of copper ore, something like that. So the production scale was really striking at that time. And the question is, how did they manage this large scale production? And then one obvious clue is to look at the text evidence. And this Kaogongji is one of the earliest that we can find at the moment to describe how the Asian people manage the massive production in China. But there, as you can see from this paper, there are quite a lot of mismatches between what it has been said in the Kaogongji, the 6 recipes, and the scientific analysis of the bronze objects. And this kind of mismatch has been bothering to the archaeologists for 100 years. And then we got this idea that pre-alloyed ingots mixed together, and that can, does not, as we said in the paper, it's not like the ultimate answer to this question, but it provides a optimal model to explain why the 6 recipes are mismatched with the scientific data of the bronzes. Yeah,
wow,
finish.
Interesting that how persistent you continued this, so that's really amazing. And yeah, so everyone, the presentation is pinned on top of the room. Feel free to click on it and follow along while Mark and Ray present it. And yeah, thank you so much. The stage is yours, Mark and Ray. Thank you.
Ray, shall I just talk people through the few slides, and if people are able to see the slides, we can just explain some of the ideas behind the project. Does that work?
Yes, that's a plan. And when you flip over the slide, probably you want to tell the audience the number of. Thank you. Great.
Okay, so I'm on the second slide, which has Kaogongji written at the top. And I've quoted from a Japanese scholar in 1936 who translated the Kaogongji into Japanese and English. And I give you 2 recipes there. There are 6 of them, but I just give you 2 as an example. And the first says the jin is divided into 6, tin occupies 1. This is the receipt for bells and tripod vessels. And then the second recipe says the jin is divided into 5, tin occupies 1. This is the receipt for axes and hatchets. So there are 6 of those for different sorts of vessels, objects. And the question is, well, there are 2 ways of interpreting those statements. One is to think that jin is a generic term and refers to the total amount of metal, in which case the first line could be interpreted as the formula translates as the final alloy being divided into 6 parts, 5 of which are copper and 1 is tin. And that gives you a recipe of 83.3% copper and 16.7% tin. But the second way of interpreting it is to say that jin is just copper, and therefore the first recipe is 6 parts copper to 1 part tin, which gives you 85.7 and 14.3. I don't think that difference is very important in the overall thing, but the question is, how do we interpret the terms jin and shi from this old manuscript? And if you go to the third slide, what were jin and shi? The traditional interpretation, which is what I've just taken from Chikushige, is that jin is copper and shi is tin. And then you can calculate from the 6 recipes what the 6 formula give you, and you can use interpretation 1 or interpretation 2. They're slightly different, but it doesn't matter very much. But the real problem is that we now have hundreds of analyses of Zhou dynasty bronzes, and almost all of them are actually ternary copper alloys of copper, tin, and lead. So the first problem that you get is, how do you interpret a binary mixture of Jin and Shi? If they're pure elements, then you can't make a ternary alloy from 2 pure elements. So the conclusion, and the first, which I think is that one of the main obvious conclusions, is that either Jin or Shi, or both of them, must be a composite alloy. They can't just be pure copper and pure tin. So in a sense, that's the starting point of the whole discussion. But if you go to the next slide, which says traditional interpretation, I've got the 6 recipes down here, 1 to 6. The 6 different typologies. The first one is bells and ding vessels, axes and hatchets. And then the 2 interpretations of the formula. This is assuming that Jin is copper and Shi is tin. It gives you the data on the right-hand side of the table, 2 sets of compositions. And it's been known for 70 years at least that these compositions don't correspond to real alloys that we can measure from the Zhou dynasty. So in a sense, that's where the problem has been for, up until about 5 years ago. But shall I just carry on, Ray?
Yes, please.
Okay, if you go to the next slide, which is a plot of percentage tin against percentage lead, this is the work that we were doing a couple of years ago on the chemical composition of early coinage in China. This is for a set of coins called knife coins. I'll show you a picture of them in the next slide. And what's striking about this diagram is there are very strong linear trends in the data, and there's the strong trend is from high tin, relatively low lead, to low tin, relatively high lead, and you can draw different lines through that data. And that was what got me started thinking about the fact that these are not just simple mixtures of copper, tin, and lead. They're mixtures of specific components. And the simplest way is to think of how do you mix 2 components to get that correlation in the data. So if you go to the next slide, on the left-hand side, there's a picture of some of these preaching coins. The bottom row has 2 different sets of knife coins, so-called because they look like knives. The top row has some spade coins and what are called ant nose coins. But on the right-hand side, I've just plotted the data from these coins, and I then started modeling the composition, just building little compositional models saying what happens if you add so much of this to so much of that. And the red line going down more or less following the trend of the data. It doesn't fit all the data. Nobody's claiming that this is the recipe. But what I am suggesting is that there's a model there, and this particular model is made by taking an alloy of 80% copper, 50% tin, and 5% lead, which is a typical composition of Zhou dynasty ritual bronzes, and adding to it increasing amounts of a second component, and that second component, the red line, is a binary mixture of lead and copper, 50-50 lead and copper. The green line, which doesn't fit the data so well, is what happens if you take that bronze composition, 80-15-5, and add pure lead to it. And it doesn't fit the data. So I'm excluding a simple model of alloying just with lead. And so what I'm suggesting on the preaching coinage is that you can replicate the composition of many of the coins using an approximate binary composition of mixing 80-15-5, which is a typical bronze composition of the Zhou dynasty vessels, and adding to it this 50-50 copper-lead mixture. And the reason I think that's plausible is that the archaeological record in China has turned up lumps of binary copper lead, which some Chinese scholars have said were primitive coinage. But actually, I think the simplest way of interpreting them is that they're a pre-alloyed component for making these coins, and you simply take some pure bronze and dilute it with this binary mixture. And that's quite a radical suggestion, because it's saying there's an additional step in the metal production for making, in this case, coins. There's an additional step in the process which says that actually at the point of casting the coinage, the metal workers are using pre-prepared alloys simply to mix them together and produce coins which have this typical composition. And we published that last year, and that I think is interesting. But that in my mind triggered a memory of trying to interpret the Caogongji, which starts with two components, and you mix them to produce what has to be a ternary composition. And so if you go to the next slide, this is the table we just published in the antiquity paper, which gives the approximate composition of the 6 recipes, starting with an 80% copper, 50% tin, and 5% lead alloy at one end, and a binary 50-50 copper alloy at the other, and just add increasing amounts of the binary alloy to dilute the primary alloy. And if you then look at the data, the next slide, this is in a sense disappointing, because the data shown here are the blue dots are the chemical composition of analyzed bronzes from elite tombs during the Zhou dynasty, and the colored dots are the 6 compositions that come from the Caogongji. And you can see that, I mean, the best you can say is that they sort of fall in the envelope of the composition of these Zhou dynasty bronzes, but they don't match all that well. And I'll come to that on the last slide. The next slide just shows some of the modeling that I did. You can see various mixing lines on a tin against lead diagram. And the 3 that start at the origin of this diagram, 0, are what happens if you just take pure copper and add to it a tin lead binary alloy, which is, in a sense, the simplest way of doing this. But you can see that the correlation structure doesn't fit the data at all. The correlations are positive going up from 0. And if you flick back to the previous slide, you'll see that the correlation data within those Zhou dynasty bronzes are don't follow that pattern, but they do follow the diagonal line patterns, which are various sorts of mixing copper tin with lead or copper lead with tin. So I think the correlation structure that you see in the data is telling us that these are quite a complicated binary composition from the correlation structure within the data. And the last slide is problematic, but I think I understand why it's problematic. The triangles show the 6 compositions modeled from one of the binary mixture that I talked about earlier, and the dots, which are all over the place, are the compositions of those forms which are supposed to be made according to this recipe. And clearly, the vast majority of them don't fit at all. So I think if I was to summarize what we're trying to say, I think that the correlation structure within the data, both of the coinage and also in the Zhou dynasty vessels, suggests that a binary mixture of a bronze copper tin lead with a copper lead alloy does replicate the patterning in the data to some extent. But that in detail, we don't replicate the composition of the vessels or the objects that we're supposed to be replicating if we believe the Cao-Gong-Ji. So the argument comes down to, and perhaps this is something Ray needs to talk about, what does the Cao-Gong-Ji actually represent? I think we now know what Jin and Shi are, and that's an important point because, as I said earlier, it suggests that there's an extra step in the metal production sequence that means somebody somewhere is creating these pre-prepared alloys to go to the casters who are making the coins or the vessels, and that's something we didn't really know about. But it still leaves us with the problem of what does the Cao-Gong-Ji, the document itself, actually represent? Ray, I'm going to pause there and get you to add to that.
Great, thank you, Mark. That's great. Good. We can keep developing on this last slide because actually in the last 100 years or so, as Mark just said, that archaeological scientists try to understand the mismatch between the scientific data of the excavated bronzes and what has been recorded in the Cao-Gong-Ji, the 6 recipes. And that is quite, I mean, in the paper, we cite Professor Falkenhausen, and his argument is that the Cao-Gong-Ji, depending on the audience, the author, the context in which it was created, the exact accuracy of the description might be doubtful. That is probably, I mean, that calms down the debate for a while. But as more and more bronzes are excavated and analyzed, then this question goes raise up again. Say that now we have more data. We look at the Cao-Gong-Ji again, and still there's a mismatch. So that really boils down to the question that how much accurate or how much exact information we can extract or we can believe within the Cao-Gong-Ji 6 recipes. And I think what Mark just said is, I mean, we can believe half actually. The Jin and Xi does exist. They do exist to some level, like the pre-alloyed ingots, and we can use that to describe to understand the ternary alloying perfectly. That's and we can explain the mathematical correlations, as Mark just said, the modeled relationships with the pre-alloyed ingot argument. But we still, I mean, as the last slide show that, I mean, we still find a mismatch between the some archaeological data and the 6 recipes. There are several reasons for this, because archaeology is always fragmented. Many scholars argue that this is, Kaogongji was created by the Qi people, one of the 7 last strong and powerful state in the warrior state period, and because they use the Qi writing, Qi grammar, etc., etc. And this slide just show you the data from the Qi state. And to be honest, the metallurgy of the Qi state is so far not very well understood. So the data is very few, and probably when more data are analyzed and published, and we plot more data on this map, on this plot, we can see that there's some kind of better match between the archaeological data and the 6 recipes. Or another interpretation is that some part of the 6 recipes, especially the exact ratios like 1:5, 1:6, they're just not correct. That is because it is kind of like the assumption is that the author was just trying to deliver this to the royal house, and nobody really cares about what happened down to the workshop level. So this is open to question, but I think we can understand the different levels of the accuracy buried in the 6 recipes. That is something I want to just quickly reflect. Yeah.
Can I build on that for a second? I think we have to think about what the Kaogongji actually is. And if you look at the history of the document itself, it first appears in a bigger volume. It's part of a larger book. The book is called Zhou Li, which is The Rights of Zhou, and it was a manual written, let's say, 300 or 400 BC, for the elite court to say, how do you organize an empire, essentially. It was a manual for running the Chinese empire at the time. And the Kaogongji was probably added to it from an earlier source. And we don't know how early that source is. But my speculation is that it might be much earlier, that it might come from the Western Zhou dynasty, which is around 1000 BC through to 700 BC, roughly. So maybe a few hundred years before the Rights of Zhou were written down. And the reason I think that is that if you look at the dynastic history of the Zhou, the Zhou succeeded the Shang in 1043 BC. And in the early part of the Western Zhou, the Zhou dynasty followed the Shang dynasty model very carefully. It used lots of ritual, and it was a highly centralized state, very much like the Shang was. But there were a number of issues and revolutions, and the Western Zhou, gradually decentralized to the point where the Zhou dynasty itself was only in titular control of the Chinese state. And the various different states, the Qin state, the Yan state, all became much more powerful and essentially only paid, if you like, lip service to the Zhou dynasty. So I think what you see is a fragmentation of the power of the central Zhou dynasty. So my suspicion is that the Kaogongji relates to an earlier period when the Zhou dynasty actually did control the metal supply across China and was able to dictate certain rules and regulations. And it doesn't apply to the date of the Kaogongji that we've got, which is 300 or 400 BC, by which time China has disintegrated into, well, finally a set of 6 states, which are called the warring states, and they're fighting each other. And gradually, the Qin state becomes the dominant state when the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi, took over in 221 BC. So I think you've got to look at the documentary history of the Kaogongji to suggest that it might relate to an earlier period when the Zhou were much more in control. I mean, the other side of that, as Ray has said, is that maybe it was simply a fiction provided to the court to try and assure the imperial family that everything was under control, whereas what was really happening was quite different. And maybe the answer is a bit of both of those.
Right. Yeah, I think we finish our talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us this insight into your work. It's so interesting how from analyzing what the possible different materials used lead to this bigger picture of how the whole structure of the empire changed over time, maybe. So that is really interesting to me, those conclusions or those yeah, what all of this entails basically. And so what do you think was the upside of using these different components of the metals? Was it to make it cheaper basically, or more moldable, or was the efficiency or availability of certain metals? Like, do you know anything about that? Like how much was available, how were they mining it? Did people find like maybe ancient mines or something like that?
Right. Mark, do you want to start?
You answer that, right?
I'll start. Okay, yeah. Sure. I mean, actually, in terms of the advantage of the using pre-alloyed ingots, I think the advantage. I mean, there are quite a lot. The major one is actually craft specification, because I mean, it is essentially, even in the modern market, we can buy this kind of pre-alloyed ingot. That gives you a quality control that I mean, because this ingot are already pre-alloyed according to a fixed ratio, and you can use it just directly turn into a object, 15% tin, 5% lead. That is really good quality of metal, and you can turn into a sword, turn into a bronze ritual vessel with a right color, and also you don't need to do extra amount of work. Basically, you don't need to worry about the purity of your metal. You don't need to weigh the metal accordingly, like how much tin, how much lead. You weigh them together and add them together according to the recipe. So it saves a lot of work. That really underpins the large scale production, I think. And another point is that, I mean, in the Western Zhou, or towards the end of the Western Zhou, Eastern Zhou dynasty, the spring autumn warring states, I mean, there are loads of local uprisings. I mean, local laws, local families, local royal families, they were rising up, and they compete with each other, like not only militarily, but also politically, culturally, aesthetically. And this kind of pre-alloying ingots really give them the opportunity to show off their bronze objects, like correct me if I'm wrong, Mark. I mean, it's something like somebody step into a modern market, and you show so many different kinds of clothes, and they tell you they are they are not only good in the styles, but also good at the materials, the technology is also good. So it acts as extra agency or extra value to the product you own or you want to purchase. And in terms of the sources of metal, actually, most of the copper mines and most importantly, tin mines are along the Yangtze River Valley. That is modern day southern China, and that is the most important source of metals throughout Chinese Bronze Age, and the the emperors of the Western Zhou, I mean, even died while fighting against the Southerners to capture their metals. So you can see there's a lot going on between the central plains of China and the southern Yangtze River, just because of metal supply. Yeah, that's Mark. Do you want to add anything on it?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that I think we need to remember that certainly in the late Shang 1200 BC through to the Western Zhou before about 770 BC, that bronze was a strategic metal. It was the strategic metal of the empire. And the reason for that is that bronze was used to make these ritual vessels. And these ritual vessels were the symbol of imperial power, but also the mechanism by which the emperors communicated with the ancestors, and ritual was at the heart of the Shang and Zhou dynasty. So these things would have had massive symbolic strategic importance. That would begin to break up with the Eastern Zhou, I think, because the rituals changed. And so I think we've got to remember that that the supply of copper, tin, and lead was absolutely central to the well-being of the state right through until at least the Eastern Zhou. The other thing I'd say, relating to the actual practice of casting, there are one or two references in the Chinese literature. I'm thinking, I guess, of the grand historian Sima Chen, and saying that the people who cast the bronzes, particularly in terms of the coinage, were not very skilled. They weren't the top craftspeople. So one advantage of supplying them with these pre-prepared alloys is that less skilled craftspeople could do that job. So I suspect it's a hierarchical thing, and we could talk about other work we've done about the social stratification of access to resources. But I think that one of the key things is that it makes it easier for less skilled craftspeople to follow a recipe if they're given these binary alloys, these pre-prepared alloys, and they don't need, to do all of the mixing and the preparation themselves. So I think on those two grounds, the question of the sources of copper, tin, and lead, as Ray's mentioned, we are getting a much better picture now through Chinese archaeological research of where these mines are, and we've got dates on some mines, and there's some been excavated, so we know a bit about where this copper and tin and lead is coming from. But what's really at the heart of this question is, how do you organize a massive empire? I mean, remember, we're talking on the scale of Western Europe, if not bigger. How does an empire like that, based in Anyang or the Zhou capitals, how does an empire like that control the metal supply? And that's a question that I think we're all still thinking about. How did that metal supply system work? Because we're talking about, it's 800 kilometers from Anyang down to the Yangtze River, across not very easily traversed. I mean, you can use the river system to some extent, but how was that organized? And it's a really crucial question, because the scale of bronze production during the Shang and the Zhou was absolutely massive. It was clearly an imperial activity, and it was a very large scale operation. So how do you supply metal over 800,000 kilometers, and how do you ensure that the imperial capital has access to the right sorts of materials at the right time? So it's quite a big economic and social question that we're really thinking about.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Now it's quality control is still, I think, a big and large effort for many companies, especially if you look into medicine, like GMP, like to have the right quality, cleanliness, and so on. And back and with all the technology we have nowadays, so to streamline that and to have all the I guess you have to monitor it and have the quality control, and then the distribution. um, it's very impressive. So was it how was it structured? Were those its manufacturers basically, and the people, the quality control people, were they like higher up in the social structure, or like was the or bureaucracy? Was it the well seen, well paid type of system that enforced that so well?
I think we can begin to answer that question if I just talk for a few seconds about some other work that Ray and I have done, which is slightly earlier. It's during the Shang dynasty, when Anyang was the capital, so 1200. What we showed there, I think very clearly, is that your social status dictated how you could access metal. So if you look at the very elite, the imperial family, essentially, the really top elite, they had access to very pure metals which had very fine levels of quality control on them. They could essentially get the best, I think, is one way of putting it. And as you come down the social scale, you're still dealing with elites, because it's only the elites that would have had access to any quantity of metal. But you can see more diversity in the alloying composition and in the trace element. So the way we interpret that is that at the top level, the emperor's court must have had craftsmen or craftspeople of the very highest quality who could command the best materials. So the emperor could command very pure copper if he wanted it. And their metal, their ritual bronzes, were made only of the finest material. But lower down the social scale, we begin to see what we think is some recycling of metal. We begin to see much more diversity of trace element compositions. So I think lower down the social scale, you still had access probably to the imperial foundries, but you didn't get the best stuff. The best stuff was kept for the emperor. And, just as a diversion, that sort of model continues through Chinese history. If you look at ceramic production in the Ming dynasty, you get exactly the same. You get imperial kilns which are using the very best quality material, and that can only go to the emperor. Whereas lower down, you can get good quality, but not as good as the emperor. So I think the whole question of metal supply, access to these really strategic resources is a really socially structured hierarchy, and that begins to help us understand. We still don't know how it worked particularly, but I think we do understand that it's a very socially stratified system.
Right. Mark, can I just add some maybe contextual information for our audience, like the bronze ritual vessels? Actually, just to follow Mark's social hierarchy discussion. Actually, one thing is for the Chinese Bronze Age, or the most important thing for Chinese Bronze Age is the bronze ritual vessels. And if you go to museums, you see them in green because they are covered by corrosion. But when you freshly cast them, when they are freshly made, they show different colors. Some of them are gold, some of them are silverish, some of them are kind of bit down gray color, and these colors are deeply linked to the owner's social status, because this, for example, these ritual vessels are always used in set. One type of vessel will go with another type of vessel for a certain kind of ceremony, and only Shang people know this very well. They know this extremely well, like our afternoon tea. We know what kind of tea set we use. But for archaeologists, we can only see from the tomb evidence that which one is paired with others, but not exactly not the exact composition. But just think about 5 or 6 bronze ritual vessels laying in front of your table. Some of you do expect them to be, at least the color should be consistent. You don't want them to be like one gray, one silver, one gold-ish. So that's really, that is really what we discovered for the top elite metal assembly, which is because of their consistent alloying composition, and their color are just always consistent. But if you just go slightly downwards the social hierarchy to the slightly not top elite but still elite people, you can see that they can't control this color issue very well. They have to use other type of color to sometimes to replace or to fill the position on their table. So that is really a kind of very strong connection between the material you can access and the social hierarchy, the position of the social in the entire social hierarchy you are located.
So was it maybe even regulated? I know in Europe, not that long ago, there were different colors, for example, that only royalty were allowed to use of, garments, like a royal blue or some specific reds, depending on the country. So was it maybe even regulated that way? Is there some evidence for that?
Oh, that's a great question. For Shang period, we don't know because we don't have this kind of textual information. But when we move to the Warring States period or later, we can see that the golden yellow or golden color, they call it golden yellow, huangjin. This is the top color, and then the silverish color is a kind of middle color, and the reddish color is kind of the third level color. And when you come to the later period, like the different dynasties choose different colors. To the medieval China, like the Tang Dynasty, they think the purple is very important, but that is no longer related to the to the metal. So it's, color is part of the recognition of the social status. But for the Bronze Age, because of the lack of the textual evidence, we couldn't reach that level of level of accuracy, I would say.
It's so interesting. I wanted to check with Joyce, Kyle, and Ryan. Did you have questions? I have been taking over a little bit, so please go ahead, flash your microphone.
Well, I'll ask a very general question. I'm wondering what do you think, if anything, you've learned from this work that might have implications for other regions of the world?
That's a good question.
Mark, yes.
In some senses, I think we might argue, Ray may disagree with me, but actually, I think what it teaches you is China is very different to the rest of the world. I don't think until you maybe come to, almost the early modern period in Europe, I don't think you get the same level of centralized control and the same sort of value system. So in a sense, what it teaches you is that China is so different from 2000 BC onwards. There are similar issues in Western Europe, for example, but they're not the same. But for example, if you look at the early Bronze Age in Western Europe, you find that the metal composition of the daggers and the metal composition of the axes are different. And so it looks like there's a recipe for making axes, and it's important that you use that recipe to make the axe, because you never mix axes and daggers. We see recycling, but you don't recycle between axes and daggers, because I think that's something symbolic about the power of axes and daggers. So in one sense, the work in China tells you that China is different to the rest of the world. But on the other hand, it does suggest that we should never approach trying to understand these artifacts from a purely technological perspective, that they have symbolic value, they have ritual value, and that there are rules which apply that maybe we don't get very well at the moment. So I think it's saying, look, don't just bring a 21st century technological interpretation to these things. They have biographies and lives that we need to understand.
Thank you. It's all very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think it's because China developed like written language so early on that it kind of made it even possible to have such a complex centralized system that you see?
I'll guess an answer and then Ray can give the proper answer. I'm not convinced that it's purely writing that's the controlling factor. I think it's scale. If, for example, China is just so big that it's organized and it's centrally controlled. If you look on a smaller scale in Europe, for instance, you see something similar. For instance, in the texts that come from the Minoan palaces on Crete, it's quite clear that the palaces are controlling certain products. And one of the products that they're controlling is metal, copper. The other thing they're controlling are textiles, clothing, wool, that sort of thing. And the third thing they control are perfumes. And those are state monopolies during the palatial period in Crete. So in a sense, it's the same story. It's just that, you know, Crete, the Minoans, is just such a small scale compared to the scale of central China during the Bronze Age, that the patterns, it's a city-state model, whereas you actually have a real empire in China. And so I think the difference is scale. It's not so much writing. I mean, there's also writing in Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they too have some imperial controls, but it's just not on the scale that we see in China.
Great, Mark, and for just follow on Mark's argument, I completely agree that writing is we need to think about writing in like more from a wider perspective, because actually the earliest form of writing in China is oracle bones, and it's about 3,200 years ago, and it is not the earliest writing at all. It's much later than what Mark just said in Mid East, and still scholars debate about the origin of Chinese writing, because I mean, for the oracle bones, it looks like it kind of like invented overnight. It's suddenly you got this kind of, during the late Shang Dynasty, thousands of animal, the turtle shells, ox scapulars, writing carved with very sophisticated characters, with very sophisticated grammars, and they show ritual function, and they really write down every detail, like the queen gave the birth to the kid, to a new son, and whether they should fight with their enemies, etc., etc. But that is not the earliest at all. But I do feel like I want to borrow a sinologist, Professor Lothar Lederer's argument. I heard from one of his lectures and also his books. Very, very interesting. It is kind of like the writing is kind of amplifier for the Chinese centralization model, as Mark said. It's because after the Shang Dynasty, during the Eastern Zhou Dynasty, now and then Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, unified the whole China and standardized writing. And after that, the characters can be always understood by the later generations to some level. Not every single character. Even now, I myself do not learn Asian Chinese. I can still read Chinese characters like 2,000 years ago. That's quite something, because through this kind of continuous writing, sort of uniform writing, the philosophy, the thinking, the technology can be passed down generation by generation. And also the writing has this kind of special power in China, and that is what I heard from Professor Lederer's lecture, which is, I feel, very striking, because in Europe, in Christianity, when we go to church, we show respect to the patterns, to the images. But we do not show, there's no church like showing 3 letters God, and then we just sing a song and doing service under these 3 letters. But in China, yes, because if you go to villages, you go to mountains. A lot of mountains are carved by very big characters, and these characters shows power, and people often go to that mountains, go to these big characters and show respect, worship their ancestors, doing ceremonies. So yes, on one hand, China invented characters writings quite late, or somehow but on the other hand, the writing really is a big amplifier for the entire social organization.
I think there's a very interesting difference between early writing in China and early writing in Egypt and Mesopotamia. And that is that in the West, writing was essentially about accounting. It was about recording crops and taxation, and it was sort of an administrative function. In China, it wasn't really that. It was because of its origin on the oracle bones, it's a means of communicating with the ancestors and the divine. And I think writing took a very different path in China because it has this ritual divine type function, which was, I mean, you could argue that in Egypt they used hieroglyphs too, you know, but it's different. I think that the core of writing in the West is an accounting function, and the core of writing in China is a divine function, and that makes them very different, I think.
Well, that is really interesting. I haven't thought about that before, that the religion itself, to worship basically ancestors, kept, so basically you mean that it kept the continuity of the culture and also the written language and the language, so that because you kind of pray to the ancestors, you keep it alive out of respect. So in that way, there's like thousands of years of continuity of the same language and the same written language. That's really interesting to me. Did that scale up the education also quite efficiently?
Education, you mean the ability to read?
Yeah, exactly. That because it's also involved in religion, was there higher motivation for everyone to be able to read and maybe even write earlier on?
I would guess not. I mean, I don't know what levels of literacy would actually have been in Bronze Age China. I suspect, like in Mesopotamia and Egypt, it was a scholarly, priestly activity. I think because in China they're pictographs, that maybe ordinary people would recognize pictographs as being, well, in later times, symbol of the Buddha, for instance, but without necessarily being. So it's a combination of a picture and a writing, and I think that again makes it slightly different. I mean, hieroglyphs were that too, but they died out in Egypt essentially. But the first point you made, I'd go even further. It's not the fact that ancestor worship meant a continuity of tradition and language. I think it's important to remember that certainly through the Shang and the Zhou, that the power of the emperor comes from his ability to communicate with the ancestors, and that the emperor derives his power from the lineages that went before him. So it's that ritual connection, which is where bronzes came in, because they were part of the ritual for communicating with the ancestors. That the very power of the emperor himself depended on his ability to communicate with the ancestors. So I think, you know, it's even stronger than just the continuity. It's fundamental.
That's really interesting. And back to the scale, since it was such a big empire, do you think the stability also came from because they just didn't have to import and export, so they didn't have to rely on other influences like different religions, different languages, so much like in European countries where there was a big turnover of culture, religion, and so on, and different tribes moving around? Do you think it's because they were kind of independent of other, they could basically self-sustain everything they needed?
I do. I think geography plays a very important role in the development of China. It is essentially geographically isolated from the rest of Eurasia by Tibet, the Himalaya, and the deserts. It's essentially, it is able to develop in isolation from anything outside that. That's not to say they didn't import. I mean, they imported bronze technology, I think. That came from the West. But I think geography played a very important part. And I'm reminded of the famous conversation between Lord Macartney in 1797 AD, who was sent to China by the British king, and the Qianlong Emperor met Macartney and took one look at the gifts that he'd brought and said, "We have everything under the sun here. We have no need of your gifts." And I think that there's a certain political posturing going on there, but I think essentially the message is, the Chinese Empire, which saw itself as the center of the world, was incredibly independent of the rest of what was going on in the rest of the world, unless it chose not to be. And then you get issues of the Silk Road and the Han and the Tang communications along the Silk Road. But I do think geography played a very important part in the ability of the Chinese culture to develop essentially on its own for 5,000 years.
I would just add one point that because if we back to the Bronze Age, like the Shang Dynasty, actually, I mean, Shang Dynasty is like only like maybe perhaps half of France, Mark. If it is,
yes.
Yeah, it's and actually the Shang Dynasty or the earlier, the Shang Dynasty is very interesting because it is located in the poorest region in terms of metal resources. But it turns out to be the biggest consumer of the metal resources. It produces the largest number of finished bronze objects, and also it continues like into the Western Zhou and also Eastern Zhou, but during Eastern Zhou, that is another issue because the Southerners, like the true state, rise up, and the Southerners, I mean, like the people, as we said, located along the Yangtze River are important because they control the metal. They control metal and people on the north north to the central plains of China, on the in the Mongolian steppe, northeast part of China, modern China nowadays. They are very important because they connect to the Eurasia steppe. Then they can have a wider perspective, information supply of what happened outside across the Eurasia continent. And also they have horses and they have gold and silver, this kind of technology. I mean, this so basically what really underpins this kind of regional interaction is a very, very sufficient, very powerful network. And because of this network, that you can, I mean, people like the Shang people who do not have metal, I mean, in their backyard can still produce a lot of metal. I mean thousands tons of metal. I mean, over 10 or 20 years. This kind of network is really important that supports the scale of production or anything further like the state building and other things in Chinese history.
Hansen and Peter, you joined the stage. Welcome. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. I have a couple of questions. The first one was partially answered by one of you. My question was, the first question was, how did the metallurgy, the bronze metallurgy emerge? I think you said it's actually imported from maybe the West, And then my follow-up question would be, how did the metallurgy, the bronze metallurgy technology emerge in the West? And the second question would be you mentioned the usage of bronze. The usage of bronze is mainly for the ceremonial purposes. And does it have other the utilization? Say, I think I read there were bronze weapons. So it seems that you haven't mentioned that, or any other tools that that is within the usage main usage of bronze. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I think I'll just repeat your question if I'm correct too, and then we can answer, right? And okay, is okay, Mark?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think I heard the question. It's about bronze weapons.
Actually, there's another. The first question is about origination of Chinese metallurgy and also the West origination of metallurgy in the West. Am I right?
Yes, the origin of the metallurgy technology.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, this is a long and complicated story, but what we think is the case is that bronze or copper metallurgy started in Western Eurasia, probably around modern day Turkey, Anatolia, the Near East, Mesopotamia, that part of the world. And that was probably 5,000 years ago. But it traveled along what was to become the Silk Road through nomads, essentially, and travelers, and entered China, let's say, about 2000 BC, 2,500 BC.
Yeah.
So 2,000 years after it was invented in Western Asia. And it got into China. But what I would say is that once it got into China, the Chinese did something very different with metal to what people were doing in Europe. Partly technologically, about using molded castings. They never, up until quite recently, they never really used beaten metal. They always cast, all the objects were cast. They probably didn't have lost wax casting until a later period. That's debatable. So they did something very different with it. I think the question of weapons is an interesting one. And I think it relates to the social stratification of the Chinese court. Unlike Western Europe and Eurasia, the leaders, the emperors, were not in general the people who led the army. There are some exceptions, but mostly the elite didn't fight. Mostly the army would have fought, but that you don't have that tradition of single combat which you have in Eurasia. You know, if you read Homer, it's and the Iliad, it's all about, you know, the Achilles, prince of here, fights with somebody, Agamemnon, you know, whoever, and it's all about elite combat, and weapons are the key issue in elite combat. It's different in China. In general, the elites didn't fight, and the army would have been a mass army of pressed recruits, probably, and they would have fought with arrows and halberds, not swords particularly. So weapons do exist in China in large quantities, but they're not tools of the elite, so you don't get the same prestige attached to swords and armor as you get in the West. So I think it's because of the social hierarchy that weapons are very low social status.
I just want to add one quick example, like to follow up Mark said. For example, for some late Shang top elite or a generous military generous too, we know he is a military general because we can read his name, and those military families have a special name, and in somebody's tomb we can find like 200 weapons, and they or 20 or 50 girl blades or another 50 spearheads. They all show identical similar shapes. Actually, this is quite different from like the what archaeologists discovered on the Eurasia steppe, that as Mark said again, the personal weapons show the personal identity. So basically, for the top for the elite in China, I mean, one person do not need 50 daggers, which is obviously, and actually this is just for the soldiers who defend his afterlife. So the probably the concept of battle doing a battle is different as well.
And the best example of that is, of course, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang,
yes.
who's buried with a terracotta army of 8,000 soldiers, and they all have arrows and blades, and so they do have them, but it's not the top elite that have them. They have no social status, really.
Peter.
Great.
Oh, go ahead, Hanson.
Oh no, just appreciate. Thank you very much. And maybe that's a little bit of field, question of field. How did then the Western Eurasian people discover bronze or the metallurgy? But maybe that's a far field. Whatever you, if you don't have time, just ignore it. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm interested in that. You could answer that question for sure.
I didn't hear a question.
Sorry, I can't hear a question just now. Could somebody repeat?
Hanson, do you want?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm just saying that. I'm just asking if how did the Eastern, I mean not Eastern, Eurasian people discover bronze metallurgy?
How Eurasia people discovered bronze metallurgy? That's a question, right?
How?
I think that's how Eurasia people discovered the question. I can start.
I can answer that. Yeah. I think in Eurasia, in Western Eurasia, there's a long tradition of using malachite, copper carbonate, for jewelry, for decoration. So going back 10,000 years, we have examples of malachite jewelry. And malachite is a very rich ore of copper. So the speculation is that humans had been using malachite jewelry for 5,000 years, and somebody somewhere discovered that if you throw it on the fire, you get molten copper out. And the suspicion is that the use of metal arises from the fact that malachite jewelry was common in Europe. But of course, there is no malachite jewelry in China. The most important material in China is jade, and that's not an ore of metal. So you can heat it as much as you like and you won't get any metal out of it. So again, the difference between China and Europe is that in China, they never used malachite jewelry, so they never discovered for themselves how to smelt copper. Now, there is an argument that actually they did, but that's a different argument. Ray, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Can I
Uh,
check out and just leave you to wind up?
Well, thank you, Mark, so much for your time. This was so interesting. So we really appreciate your talk and the time you put in here. And hopefully one day we'll talk again.
Yeah, Mark, if I ask Katerina for your email address, would you mind if I sent you an email sometime in the near future? I just I didn't have a good proper question formulated, but there have been a few that have come to mind that I would like to ask at a later time, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
All right, I'm going. I'm going to have some noodles.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
your answers. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy weekend.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ray. See you.
See you.
Ray, if you need to go, let us know. If not, we have Peter.
Yeah, I probably need to take off now as well. Yeah.
Okay.
It's Friday night.
I understand. It's really late for you by now. So thank you so much for coming here and taking the time,
Great.
sharing your work.
Thank you very much for inviting us. That's a really jolly experience. Yes, thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, and please come back one day. Maybe update us on your research, and yeah, I hope you get to do
Great.
this many more years and share with us one day. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I will. Yes. Thank you everybody for your time and the questions. Thank you.
Okay, enjoy your weekend.
You too. Have a nice weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Peter, yeah, thank you everyone for coming. This was such a pleasure, such a great discussion. I hope you all enjoyed it. We have actually a room tomorrow with 2 guest speakers. Dr. Wu, she was earlier here in the room. She is an engineer working in neuroscience technology development, and she did her PhD at the Northwestern, and now she's at Neuralink, and she is sharing her latest publication with her colleague. It will be really interesting new developments in neuroscience research technologies. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'll close the room in 3, 2, 1. Bye, everyone. Thank you.